All right, so in this video, we're going to start by programming the movement of the car. So that's the first thing that we need to make sure we have is that we're able to move the car the way we want it to. So what we're going to do first is obviously we're going to set the when flag is clicked, and we're also going to define a couple of variables that are going to help us with programming this game. So there are a couple of things that we always need to make sure we check when we start the program. We need to set a couple of things, and we need to be checking a couple of things constantly. So what are those things? So first of all, we need to check to see if the game is running or not, right? Because if the game finishes, like the way we're gonna go with this game is we want to go 3 laps around this racetrack, and once we make the 3rd lap back to the finish line, then we're good to go, right? The game has finished and we want the game to stop. But before that, we don't want the game to stop. We want to make sure the game keeps going and we're able to do all the things that we're normally doing the whole time. We want to make sure we're able to move the car at will and we're able to follow the game basically. So we need to define a variable that essentially checks for this, right? So I'm going to name it finished. Okay, so first variable finished is just going to check to see if the game has finished or not, right? Essentially, if we have made all 3 laps. Again, make sure that you check off this later on because we don't want this to show up in our program, but I'm going to leave it on for now so we can see what we're doing, okay? But later on, we're going to untick this tick. Just remember that, okay? Just don't forget about it. But for now, we'll leave it on. And we're going to use this set finish to 0 because we want to make sure that every time we start the program, every time we click on the flag, that the program knows that, okay, we're not in a state of finished. Okay, so the way we're gonna define it is if finished is 0, that means the game is going on. If finished is 1, that means that we have actually finished. Okay, so we're just using a 0 and 1 kind of thing. And obviously, once we finish all 3 laps, then we're going to tell the program, okay, now set finish to 1. Okay, so that's what we're going to check, and that's what we're going to set every time. Now, there's another thing that we need to account for, and that's a timer, right? Because we want to time. It's a racing game. We want to see how fast you're able to finish the 3 laps. So obviously, we need another variable that is keeping track of our time. So I'm just going to name it time. And again, we need to set that to 0 as well because every time you run the program, well, no time has elapsed from the game because the game just started. So we need to make sure we also set the time to 0 every time, okay? And then we also need another variable because guess what? The car is going to be changing its speed depending on how long we've been holding on the acceleration or if we go off the track, right? Like if we go into these green areas, we want the car to slow down, right? Because essentially we're going in the grass and it's not going to be able to go as fast, right? So the speed is something that we're changing the whole time in this game, and we need to always be aware of what the speed is supposed to be at any given time, depending on what we're doing, right? So we're going to make another variable for the speed. And obviously we need to set it 0 for first because in the beginning, obviously there is no speed. We've just started the program, so there's no speed to account for. So make sure we have all these. I know it looks a little weird that we're setting everything to 0, but the reason for that is because we're starting the program, right? And everything needs to be a 0 at the start. All right. Obviously, we also need to make sure the car goes back to the place where it's at right now. Like if we finish off with the car somewhere over here, we need to make sure the next time we run the program, the car goes back to its right place. So again, just a simple set to position should do the trick. So we're just going to go to x -60, y 155. Just double check those numbers again. And obviously, we also need to make sure that the car is pointing in the right direction because, again, we may have finished the game with the car pointing in a different direction. We need to make sure it's pointing in the correct direction as well. So also go for the point in direction and change that to -90, right? Because that's the direction we're actually in. So I'm just going to change that to -90. There we go. All right, so these are the things that we need to make sure we're setting it to the original setting every single time we press the flag and we start the program. Okay, so once you have those, now we're ready to program for the movement of the car. Now, Obviously, we want the movement to be going on the whole time we're playing this game, right? We don't want our ability to move the car to go away at any time before the game ends. So that sounds like we need to use a forever command over here, right? Now, what we could do is we could program the movement of the car right here inside this forever. But we're actually going to learn a new technique here. Because guess what? It would be too messy. Like we already have a lot of lines of code, and we're also going to be writing a lot of blocks that determine how the car is supposed to move and how it slows up, how it speeds down. A lot of different things are going to go into the movement of the car. So it's going to be a lot of blocks just explaining. And if I just put all of that here inside this forever, this is going to be a long, long blockchain, right? And in order to just simplify it a little bit, what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to place some kind of a placeholder, right? So just come down here to my blocks and follow me. This is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to make a new block, and I'm going to call it move, right? Because it's the movement of the car that we're dealing with. Now, what this does is it creates a separate place for us to define what move means, and we have the ability to put just move inside this forever. So what this is essentially doing is we're essentially saying, hey, when you get to this point and when you're inside this forever loop, do what we have over here, right? So essentially, instead of just putting like 10 blocks inside of this forever, we put those 10 blocks over here, and we call that movement, and then we just say that, hey, refer to that movement, which means basically just go over there and do those 10 blocks, right? So this just makes it a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier to see. And the benefit of this is if I ever use these 10 lines anywhere else in our program, I can just use this one little block. I don't need to do those 10 lines one more time, or I don't need to put those 10 blocks again in that place. And I can just use this little thing, right? So it's almost like I'm building my own block, right? So that's exactly what it is. It's called my blocks for that reason, because it's a block that isn't there by default in this Scratch programming tool, but I can actually make that tool myself. And this is actually something that's very useful going forward. This is what we call functions, right? Because you're essentially making your own function, and you're giving definition to your own functionality that you want to provide in your program. So we're going to be using this a lot in the future. Very important technique to learn about. But essentially what's happening here is that forever we are doing what we have over here, what we're going to put over here underneath define move. Okay, so let's go over there and put what we need to put there. So how do we go about doing this? We first need to make sure that the game is not finished and the game is still running. So we're just going to put a simple if over here, and we're going to say, hey, if the game is not finished, meaning if finished is actually still the 0 that we set it to originally. So we're going to put an equal sign, and we're going to say, hey, if finished equals 0, which means the game is still running, then what we're going to do is we're going to just go over all the movements that we need to apply. Okay, so the way we want this car to move is whenever we're pressing the up arrow key, we want it to increase in speed, essentially accelerate. And anytime we press any of the other keys, like the left or the right, it rotates, right? We're not going to worry about the rotation for now. We're just going to focus on making sure that we actually increase the speed with the up key, right? So first of all, let's make sure that we're hiding this variable, the speed variable. And then we're going to just check to see if we're actually pressing down on the key, the up arrow key. So we're going to go over here, and we're going to just grab an if. And we're going to say if key up arrow is pressed, then do this. Okay, so what do we do if the up arrow is pressed? Well, first of all, we need to make sure that we're changing the speed, right? So we go over here to variables, and we say change speed by, let's say, 0.2. All right. And then we're also going to make sure that the speed doesn't go above a certain point, because if we just leave it to go up and change by 0.2 the whole time that we're pressing on the up key, what's going to happen is that the speed is just going to keep going up and up and up, and at some point it's just going to be ridiculously fast. So we want to also make sure we put an upper limit so that it doesn't go above that speed. So come over here and put this thing, and we can just have an operator say, hey, if speed is above 5, then just make it be 5, right? Don't make it go above 5. So what this does is that it makes sure that anytime we go above 5, we just return it to 5 and make sure it doesn't go above 5. All right. Now, how about the down key? If the down key is pressed, we want to make sure we start slowing down, right? So let's do the down key as well. So the same thing we had over there. And we say, hey, if we press the down arrow, then change the speed, but this time by a negative number. And we also want to make sure the negative number is actually more than we have over there, because it's very important to make sure when we're braking, essentially, think of it this way. When you're driving, when you brake, you immediately come to a stop, right? So stopping is a lot faster than accelerating. So let's just put this a -1 for now. All right, so anytime we press the down key, we change the speed by -1, but of course we need to make sure we don't go below 0. We can't have a speed less than 0. That wouldn't make any sense. So we need to check for that as well. So again, same thing, similar to over here. If the speed is less than 0, then make sure that you set the speed to 0, right? Because we want to make sure we don't go below 0. All right, so last thing that we need to add is we need to add a movement, right? Because now that we have the speed set up, we also need to make sure that the move function is actually moving the car as well. So we're going to say move by speed step. So whatever the speed is, that's how we're going to move in that second. All right, so make sure you have that set up. And this is basically the basic functionality for the movement of the car. Later on, we're going to add some other material. Like, for example, we want to make sure the car slows down a little bit when it goes on the green material, because that's a grass and we're going off track. But for now, let's just make sure the car is actually moving. And also, let's just go ahead and untick these for now so that we can run and see what's going on here. So we run the program, and as you can see, it highlights these blocks because they're being run forever, as you remember. And let's just try it. I'm going to press the up key, and the car starts going super fast. Let's try one more time. I'm going to press the up, it's going, and now I'm slowing it down. Very nice. And then it keeps going faster and faster, and just like that, right? One more time. I'm just going to press a couple of times, and there we go, and then we're slowed down. Press a couple of times, and then we slow down. Very nice. All right, so this is working exactly the way we wanted it to. And we got to make sure that, and we need to add basically two things. One thing that we need to add is the rotation that we don't have right now. So we're going to add that in the next couple of videos. And we're also going to add a functionality where when we go on the green material, it actually slows down our car. Okay, so those are the things that we're going to add in the next videos. But for now, make sure that this is working properly. Try it out yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.